we've got myself, Sika, and Rachel,
That's
and
right.
Ian, and they are the co-hosts of this show with me. So today's topic is, what's today's topic?
Vlad Tepes,
Vlad
which I
Tepes.
which
Yay.
I've actually been really looking forward to covering. And I know I've been begging you, Sika, to talk about Vlad Tepes because I think he's just such a really prominent figure, and yeah, I think just Vlad as a man, as you know, the real life version of Vlad, and actually him as a myth and as a vampire and being portrayed as Count Dracula in Bram Stoker's version. There's just so much out there about Vlad Tepes. I really just went down the rabbit hole literally when it came to researching him and had a really hard time downsizing the information. I'm sure you know what that's like, Seeker. You go down it and down it and down it because he had such a really fascinating life. And he had a very hard life. And there was a lot of he did a lot of physical fighting. There was a lot of wars. He was constantly fighting for his home seat, his own throne. It's I think in a way I find it quite admirable. I find him quite admirable. I know that might surprise some people. He's been portrayed because of, I think, Bram Stoker's Dracula and a couple of other vampiric stories that he's been portrayed as this bad guy. And actually, I discovered in Romania, they actually see Vlad not as a bad guy, as a natural hero in his own country, because all he was doing at that time was trying to defend the people of Romania and against thieves, against, they were constantly fighting the Ottomans and the Hungarians. They were 1 minute aligned with, the next minute they weren't. So it was so much going on.
It was a pretty tumultuous time then,
yeah,
right? In general in Europe. And so I think that, and that's kind of why I titled this, Vlad, the man, the myth, and the monster, because there seems to be those categorizations of him.
Yeah.
And we should probably talk about him as the man initially, so that people understand, where he was in history and how his life and what he contributed or what he did played a big part in that part of Europe at that time, because we're talking here it's a period between essentially what we would classify medieval and Renaissance. And so
he was considered a medieval ruler of, and he was the ruler of Wallachia, and he was, and I just want to sort of make it clear and clarify more about who is the man. I'm talking about Vlad Tepes III. His father, his father was the second, and I guess there can be some confusions, obviously. So I just want to make it clear. I'm talking about Vlad Tepes III. His time of birth would have been between 1428 and 1431, and he sadly died in 1476. And they said that they believe that Vlad was most probably born after his father settled in Transylvania in 1429. And he was born the second son of the nobleman Vlad Dracula II, which is what I mentioned.
I'm going to interject here for a second, because we need to talk about the name. Because Vlad, Tepes is not really his name, right?
Well, Vlad Dracula.
Taylor. So and so in reality, his father was made a knight in the Order of Dragons.
That's right. That's correct.
I guess I shouldn't say that.
And so was he, right?
At the time. Yeah. And so his father was given the name Dracu or Dracul. Right, and then Dracula is essentially just the son of.
That's right.
So much like you would have Anders' son or Mac or Mick in Scottish and Irish.
Yes, that's exactly it.
And denotes that means he was the son of. But it's important to say, because this really started with his father.
Right. Yes, it definitely did.
It started with his father. And I think the pinnacle of everything that Vlad did in his life was due to what happened to him, his father, and his brother Radu, because they were all taken hostage essentially
Right.
at a meeting that was supposed to not go in that
Yes.
direction, right?
Yes,
This was
yes,
supposed
it
to be
changed
a meeting.
everything. It changed
And
Vlad's
yeah,
whole course.
it
And
did.
yeah, that was
Yeah,
an
and
incredibly
so
a real pivotal moment
right,
when
and that meeting
yeah.
led to the three of them being taken hostage,
Hmm.
but they allowed Dracul Senior to go on the subjugation that his sons would remain as part of the, you know,
Right, as part of the bargain
stay
to
within the
basically
Ottoman
demonstrate
Empire.
Vlad the Second's loyalty.
Mm,
Um, it was
yeah,
to prove
testing it
that he
like
was
he
going
did
to be
his
loyal and
sons,
keep his
right? His
word.
son.
He left
Yeah.
his sons there. Yep, right.
So, Ian, what
Yeah.
did you find when you were doing your research here? Do you feel that that would be a sort of a pivotal point in his life, or do you think there's some other things that maybe led to the later stories of Vlad Dracula?
So
Hmm.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I will say that when I was doing my research, I found researching Vlad the individual uh, pretty much just as boring as as the vampire novel from Bram Stoker. To be honest with you, yeah, I don't know what else
Wait a
to
minute.
say, but
Yeah,
yes,
I don't
I would
find
agree with
boring,
that.
but
Yeah.
Do you know not a lot is known about his mother, Vlad's mother? It's not mentioned a lot, but apparently modern historians identify Vlad's mother as either the daughter or kinswoman of Alexander the First of Moldavia, or as his father's unknown first wife,
she is merely
Anthony.
a wife and a mother to these to Vlad Dracul and to Vlad and Radu. And the interesting thing that I find here is it really does start from that point where they were taken. The boys remained with the Ottomans. They were raised by the Ottomans. They were schooled by the Ottomans. They, in arts and culture and things. And it's interesting because Radu went in a different direction than Vlad, and I think Vlad always resented the fact that they were
Yeah,
taken, and Radu sort of sided with the Ottomans, and Vlad went on to become more of a warrior and a horseman, and Radu not so much. He just, I think he was a little less strong-willed at that point
yeah,
than Vlad, right? I think Vlad was probably the more strong-willed of character, which
right.
again,
And Radu was much younger, and I think far more
yes,
influential. You know, he was about 14 at the time of the
mhm.
hostage. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
it makes a difference.
impressionable
Certainly, I know
age. Yeah,
that in terms
Stockholm
of
syndrome for
myself.
sure.
Yep,
And
that
they
would
really
right
helped. They really put Radu on a pedestal, as it were,
pedestal.
and
Yeah,
worshipped him. And I guess he was very well revered. I think he was known as Radu the Beautiful, and um,
right. Yes.
yeah, it
Well,
was.
and they do touch on that. There's some films and some historical things that talk about
Mm,
Radu in a different light than Vlad, of course. But sort of jumping ahead as using that as growing up under that Ottoman influence, and when he is finally out of there and heads back home, he has a real hate on for them at this point.
as he
Um,
should. I mean, I don't think he was wrong to do so. I kind of
yeah,
agree with him
exactly.
with him on this.
So Ian, for you, what is the interesting part of Vlad's life? Like I'm talking in terms of, do you find him more interesting from the stories that come later, or just
Me,
more what
his.
no
Oh, Ian, I'm sorry, Ian.
yeah,
Yeah, that's okay. Um, yeah, for me, I find it's the whole Dracula um, legend, the
right.
writing that Bram Stoker created based upon, at least from what we've all understood, based
Hmm.
upon Vlad.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's what I find interesting. As you mentioned off the top, these days in Romania, he is still considered
Yes.
Hero.
a very much revered national
Mhm.
hero.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right.
but
Yeah.
you also hear the other side of the stories where he's just this
monster,
tyrannical,
right.
Yeah.
kind of
Well, that existed.
person.
He
Do you know
was
what I mean?
tyrannical, but
Yeah.
it was the reasons that he was tyrannical. That I mean, that was there was a reason he was called Vlad the Impaler, because that was his favorite
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
form of torture. And he was just he did everything he could to instill fear. In the hearts of everyone. He was notorious for but it was all his enemies. We just want to clarify, everything he did
It
was
was
against
not
his
the
enemies.
people of his area, right?
Right,
And the people that
exactly.
he had a beef with were the boyars, the upper class, And it
Yes.
seems funny because we think of him as this wealthy man and this person of means, but that class was much different towards even towards them, right? Because of what had happened to his father and what had happened to the family in general. The upper echelon of society did not view them in a good light. So
No.
they didn't think highly of them. So, I think that he was more for the every person and not so much for the upper class, which annoyed the upper class. But I also find it interesting that there seems to be a lot of myth around him too, right? And in terms of the Dracula story, of course, but also in terms of historically what happened and the numbers of people that he supposedly impaled and how he impaled, and the fact that he rolled his dining, out to the fields to watch tens of thousands of people suffering while he sat there and ate his dinner. Is that really true? Or is that another one of those things that just, becomes part of the myth of Vlad Tepes or Vlad Dracula? I've done a lot of research on this, and I find that while I'm sure there's always some truth, I do believe a lot of the numbers were greatly inflated to make him appear much more terrifying. And I think that was done a little bit, it was propaganda of the time. It worked in both directions. If the Ottomans heard about that, they were terrified. If his own people heard about that, they cheered, right? Yeah,
right.
Killed
it's the equivalent of the British Robin Hood in a way. They rob the poor, rob the rich for the poor. It's the same kind of thing.
I mean, it's an age-old story of good versus evil, really. And then somewhere along the way, the good is influenced by the evil and becomes this myth of this, this monster that becomes Dracula. And, then Bram Stoker takes this history and takes advantage of the name, especially because it really was the name that he latched onto.
Dracula.
Right?
Dracula.
Yeah, Dracula, right? Dracula. And that was really what propelled it, and also the Nosferatu, because that name is also associated with it. And that's an interesting term unto itself, because it kind of means evil and bad and demon and blood sucking and all of those things. And so we now have this term that Bram Stoker has used, Nosferatu, plus and it's Nosfera, but Nosferatu. And then he's taken Vlad's name, Vlad Dracula, and made it into this creature based on some of these stories. I mean, I do want to mention too, though, there's an Irish story as well about a king that kind of goes awry and drinks people's blood as well.
So I didn't know
that Stoker would have probably taken that folklore, that tale, and merged it with the Vlad tale to get this creature that becomes, Count Dracula, right? And so